Hello everyone, this is the Diction Lecture that some people missed after the ice storm. What we're going to look at is just really the forms of diction and understanding word choice in order to enhance your academic writing. And then there's always a kind of famous quote, handle them carefully for words of more power than atom bombs, ooh. But again, it's important when we look at how word choice matters. So we're just going to take you through the forms of diction here. So let's define our terms first. Diction simply means word choice. What words I choose and the level of formality that goes hand in hand with word choice. So understanding how and when to use a specific form of diction is important to particular writing and speaking situations. Obviously, you know this. One thing that we were discussing in class, of course, is how we would speak differently in front of our grandparents versus our friends versus our boss. There's all sorts of differences in language and word choice, right, and word usage that we, again, deploy when we're around different people. So you already know this. When we get into writing, this is what we're going to focus on. Now, there are numerous forms of diction technically, but 7 in particular are the ones that are the widely used. 6 are writing and speaking. 1 technically is only writing, but we hear it now again in speaking. The basic level really is this idiomatic expression, and what idioms are, they're expressions in which their meanings cannot be derived from their individual meanings of its elements. A little complicated definition, but you'll see, I think, with the example. For example, I'm broke. Well, what does this mean? Well, it means I have no money. But let's look at the words, right? Word I, okay. I am, right? Okay. But broke, right? Shouldn't broke mean broken, right? However, we know idiomatically that this means I have no money. Idioms are crazy, when you think about them. They're very difficult for second language learners because if you learn the denotation, again, go back to what we were talking about this week, the denotation of a word, right? Broke should not mean all of a sudden, in this context, no money, right? It should only mean I'm broken. But we automatically recognize this phrase informs us that the speaker has no money because of previous contexts, right? Idioms, as I said, are the most difficult to comprehend for second language learners because they make no sense. Again, raining cats and dogs, cutting the cheese. These phrases we're all familiar with right off the bat, right? All sorts of phrases that we use that we really just throw around all the time in conversation. But when we get into writing situations, many people won't understand them, so that's why we want to avoid idioms at all costs. Another good example of an idiom that's metaphoric is this one. He's an Amazon troll. I've seen this troll, right, pop up, right? What does this phrase exactly mean? Well, according to Urban Dictionary, this use of troll refers to one who purposefully and deliberately, that purpose usually self-amusement, starts an argument in a manner which attacks others on a forum without in any way listening to the arguments proposed by his or her peers, or one who negatively rates a popular product to decrease its score. So, this expression, and again, like here's all the idioms, right? Amazon is a company, but it's also a place, right? If we said this 15 years ago, people wouldn't really know what we're talking about. But the troll here, right, is interesting, this use of a metaphor. One very popular phrase right now, throwing shade, right? That's a really good example of another idiom. We use idioms all the time, and it shows how complex our language is because, again, we think in metaphorical terms. If we were just literal, we would only use words to mean what they mean, right? Another form, and this is the form that technically is only in writing, but of course I hear a lot of people jokingly, but as well as sincerely, say LOL and OMG and all sorts of text speak. But it's a relatively new form of diction because it derives from instant messaging and texting. It involves the shortening of words, phrases, as well as replacing them with emoticons or numbers or what have you. It kind of somewhat resembles a form of shorthand since writers leave out vowels most often. So, for example, if I send something like this, Ma, thanks for the money, you'd understand, and I could actually read this, and even though that it should almost be nonsense to us, we understand that all these symbols and shortening and misspellings in a way actually reflect real language. And so again, it's interesting to see how our minds are structured because even though we know English, we actually know several forms, that derive from English, right? So this larger language unit, this larger speaking unit, we have several sub-languages, involved because of these forms of diction. Slang is the next one, and slang usually refers to language that, of course, is informal, non-standard vocabulary. Usually there's some kind of grammatical issue here. For example, if I say I ain't got no dough, right? We have this informal verb, we got double negative, we got the, again, note the idiom dough. But despite its informality, slang still follows standard grammar. We have subject, verb, direct object. We will still have the kind of basic components of the language. It's just in very informal structure. Note, of course, as I said, we have an idiom here. In every form of diction except for standard will have idioms. They will have metaphorical language uses because, again, if you speak in standard denotation, right, every word means what it means. We still have problems, as we discussed with modifiers, but we won't have idioms. Here, we will always have idioms. And so, again, dough meaning not bread, but actually money. And, of course, bread is another idiom for money. The next form of diction would be colloquial or regional, and that pretty much sums up in the definition. It involves language of a particular region or group. Unlike slang, colloquialisms typically consist of standard words, but the people of a certain dialect will use words that their standard denotations will not include. For example, I'm out of bucks. Again, we have an idiom, right? Bucks meaning male deer, or bucks meaning money, right? We have an idiom here. But we also have a regionalism. This phrase in British English, right, if you went to Britain, they wouldn't be widely used. And most people actually still wouldn't really quite understand what you mean. They may have heard it maybe from movies, but generally speaking, they wouldn't use this and they wouldn't have exposure to most people who would say this. And so this only applies to pretty much Canadian, American, and Australian English. The substitution of male deer for money makes sense to the culture we learned because buckskins, were used in trading. Yet it shouldn't make sense if we were strictly, again, a denotative speaking species. So again, we still have use of idiom with bucks. We have a regionalism, colloquialism, at the same time. Other regionalisms, and this is always fun to discuss. We had a great discussion in class. Backpack, book sack. What do you call that? What do you call? Is it soda? Is it pop? There's all sorts of colloquial language, right? The colloquial diction that is fun. Usually we don't get in trouble. One major issue that I always bring up in England, of course, the word fag. In America, right, it's a derogatory term. In Britain, it just means cigarettes because of the original word faggot meaning bundle of sticks. And so you see the metaphor there with the kind of slur there, but in Britain, they just use it not as a slur by any means. It's just simply for cigarettes. And so sometimes colloquialisms are fun, and usually the difference in meanings are more entertaining than not, but sometimes they can be a little troublesome, right, if you don't know the regionalism. The next stage, of course, is conversational. And so in this one, obviously, it's the speaking one. The way in which you speak, of course, as we've gone on for numerous times, is different from the way in which we write. Conversational diction is close to standard grammar, but it's just a little bit more informal, right? And again, it's not slang anymore. It's just kind of informality. For example, I got no money, right? Technically, there's nothing wrong. We don't have any kind of euphemism or idiom. We don't have any kind of double negative, but it's just informal. The use of got is informal, right? But again, the meaning is clear. I don't have, most people, and I would say all people who understand the language will understand what you're trying to say here, but it's just a little bit informal. And so you always have to be careful about that. The best way, the best form of diction, in my opinion, would be standard and proper. Standard diction is the most recognizable, of course. Anyone who is literate and able to speak the language will understand it. Now, again, will we have miscommunications? Yes, as we saw with the modification lecture, right? Yes, we will have times where we will have linguistic misfires. But most of the time, it's going to work, right? I have no money, right? Simple subject, noun, verb, direct object, right? This sentence is in proper noun, verb, direct object form. The words contain standard meanings. There's no idiom here. Money means money, no means no, have means have, I means I, right? There's no misinterpretation here. And so again, usually standard and proper diction will function this way, right? Everyone should be able to understand it who speaks and reads the language, and typically there's not going to be any kind of direct misinterpretation. The last stage would be erudite diction. And of course, feel free to experiment and try using this. If you have a large vocabulary, great. This is verbose, lofty language, right? So I could tell you, I am pecuniarily embarrassed, right? Meaning, of course, that I have no money, but again, we're using very highfalutin language here. Typically, writers use this form to demonstrate their knowledge of vocabulary or to fulfill expectations of their field of study. You may have professors, who talk in very erudite, language. That you may have friends who, really love their vocabulary or show off their vocabulary. And they may, again, just to kind of either show off the vocabulary or fulfill the expectations of their field of study, talk very eloquently, right? Very eruditely, I guess. I don't know what what is the adverb there? I guess eruditely. So, again, we have these forms, and they all serve specific purpose. Note that in that one, I didn't mean to hit that one. Note that in this one we have embarrassment as an idiom, right? Not the kind of meaning a lack of, rather than how we normally would associate it with, feeling shameful. So let's just recap. Each form of diction offers an important opportunity for communication, right? If you're in a group, right, who speaks slang, you kind of separate yourselves from the other, speaking populations. Although standard diction invites a large number of communicators, slang, regional, or erudite diction offers a particular group exclusive terms and forms of expression. And that's often very important, right? Even if you're speaking slang, and not I mean just using like one slang word, but if you actually are entrenched in the language, right, Ubonics and things like that, it offers you a very important exclusion because the wider audience would not understand you, and so you now have exclusive terms that it's very kind of almost like a secret community, right? That we have a language that most people don't understand, and that's very important. Regardless of connotation, slang and erudite diction function by distancing a particular group of speakers from the larger speaking population. So as I was saying with slang, erudite diction works the same way. We are so intelligent that no one else will understand us. There is a reason why people, form very condescending language units, right? Now all forms of diction too, except for standard, will, as we say, will include idioms. Standard diction, of course, suits a more democratic paradigm. It allows strict but common guideline rules and word usage for all speakers to follow. And so again, it's really important to realize how much you know of our language already. And again, the good writing and good speaking comes from understanding the expectations. If you're going to go before, if you're going to write a newspaper, well, you probably will use more conversational and regional language. If you're going to speak before a wider audience, well, it's probably good to use standard diction, right? If you're going to present at a very, specific conference, right, of, neurosurgeons, or you're going to use very lofty erudite diction. And so again, it's very important that we recognize all sorts of ways that we manipulate language for various reasons, right? Obviously, if you have any questions, email. If not, again, just work on the homework about diction and modifiers. Take care and have a good day.